Kathleen, the biggest story in women's soccer at the moment is confirmation late last night coming from a report by the former acting Attorney General Sally Yates and the law firm King and Spalding that they concluded that at the top level of women's professional soccer in the US, players were subjected to pervasive, systemic and widespread sexual abuse and harassment, and the NWSL, the governing body, and US Soccer did little to stop it. So this is a report, I think it's 310 pages, and people are just beginning to digest the contents of the report, which are absolutely horrific, but also the consequences and what's going to happen next. So I know you haven't had a chance to read the full report just yet, but certainly the top line reporting on it is beginning to paint a fairly horrific picture.
Yeah, it's not great. I think I've read about 200 pages of it, and it is one of those reports that you need to stop and take breaks every so often. I mean, no one was surprised necessarily reading this. I think what was surprising wasn't so much the contents, it was the depths of cover-up and the amount of times the teams involved were told this person has done something or allegations have been brought against this person and nothing was done. Like, they may have been let go from an organisation, but whichever team picked them up next weren't warned about it, or they were warned about it and just didn't do anything. And that's, like, we saw up to 5 different firings or people leaving the NWSL last year because of these allegations. So everyone knew they were in the pipeline. I just don't think anyone knew how truly awful some of them were, and also how much very high up people had covered them up. The commissioner, the former commissioner Lisa Baird, left last year because it was found that the NWSL had been told several times that there were several coaches in their system that were abusing players. And she initially, whenever the reporting came out from The Athletic, said that she wasn't aware of it and then they were going to do whatever they could to support players. And then emails came up that showed that she had been told about it a couple of months ago. But this literally goes like right to the very, very core of US football. Some of the people named in the report are the most well-known names, and not even just US football, like women's football across the world. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the fallout is from this, and you have to give full credit to, you know, Manashim and Sinead Farley. They were the 2 players that first came out last year, went to The Athletic, reported what they had gone through, and that was the thing that sent all of this in motion. And if they hadn't done that then, it's really hard to see where we would be now. Like, this whole report wouldn't have happened. And also it was mentioned in the report that there was several allegations brought forward that they just didn't have time or they didn't have the resources to investigate. So there's possibly other stuff still to come out that we don't even know about. So I think it's a really important step for US soccer, but it's also really important for world football to see that, you know, you can't get away with these things. Eventually it will catch up with you and there will be repercussions. These
coaches, some of them still active. This isn't a historic abuse story. This isn't like the 50s, 60s, 70s or 80s. This is ongoing. This is like in the last couple of years.
Most of this would be from the last 20. So most of the coaches that are mentioned in the report were all still coaching last season. And if not last season, the season before. So it's very, very recent. And all of these coaches have been in the coaching sphere for the last 20 years. You know, they're not casual names. They're not people that you wouldn't know about. They are names that you would know if you follow women's football. And also a lot of them would have worked in youth soccer as well, which is one of the things. The report doesn't go into youth soccer, it just focuses on NWSL, but they make it very, very clear that this abuse starts at that level and it continues up to the senior ages. So even when you think about it from that perspective, that's, you know, young girls that are being subjected to this and then being subjected to it as grown women as well. And this circle of abuse is so strong that there's no way out. There's nowhere for you to go. If you've reported it to the highest people you can and they don't do anything and you keep seeing this person getting a job year after year after year, what are you supposed to do? A lot of these women left the league and left football because that was the only recourse they could see to actually keep themselves safe and keep themselves in a protected place.
So the Federation had commissioned the study after that story in The Athletic, and similar charges were reported in the Washington Post from other people. And then the fallout forced the resignation or the removal, still to be confirmed, of the commissioner, the general counsel, and 5 of the league's 10 coaches.
Yeah, it was massive. It was I remember when I was reporting on it at the time for ESPN, and just every day being completely bewildered that something else was coming out about another coach. And, you know, the league at the time did what they could in terms of players. They, in the middle of a game, they took a minute's silence, and like both sides and all the management, like, linked arms and just stood there, and it was incredibly powerful. Yeah, because of the time difference, I remember watching it. It was like 2-3 a.m. our time, and just sitting in my kitchen, just like a silent tear running down my face, because I think you watch what these women go through and you know that it's not just in football, it's not just in sport. This is something that we see across workplaces. It's something that every woman has probably either experienced or heard one of her friends experience before. So it was just incredibly powerful to see these women coming together, and they did it by themselves. This was purely the players and ex-players coming forward and saying, I experienced this, I'm going to talk about it because I don't want this to happen to other people. And no matter how much the higher ups tried to push them down or tried to push the story down, they still managed to come to the top with it. And I think, you know, full credit goes to them for that, especially even players like Alex Morgan, who is one of the most well-known footballers in the world. She was one of the main people that pushed these women who, or not pushed them, supported these women who had left the league, who wanted to come forward with their stories, who wanted to come talk about it, and used her power in that way to help support them in the background. And then only when it all came out, even then she was kind of still in the background, but she was then using her voice, using her platform to promote them more and to make sure that these clubs who, and even the report says that a lot of the clubs that everyone knew were letting these allegations just go by, actually tried to stop the report happening and tried to stop witnesses coming forward, tried to stop access to documents. So despite everything that they said last season, that they wanted to, you know, fully cooperate, fully help, take these people out of circulation, they were still trying to stop it all coming out until the very last minute. So
yeah, the report concluded multiple players informed teams, the league and US Soccer about misconduct, but those reports were ignored. It also says this isn't confined to the professional league. Abuse in the NWSL is rooted in a deeper culture in women's soccer, beginning in youth leagues, that normalises verbally abusive coaching and blurs the boundaries between coaches and players. So, I don't know, is the publication some kind of a wake-up call for women's soccer, for the authorities, for people outside women's soccer to take a deeper look at that pervasive culture?
I hope so. I feel like we've been here before, and, you know, if last year, even just the initial reporting that came out wasn't enough of a wake-up call, and some of these clubs were still trying to sweep things under the rug in the year since, I don't know how optimistic I am that it'll be a massive wake-up call, but I think it's really important that it is being talked about. It is something that, you know, people, you can't ignore it. Like, if you read, even if you read some of the articles about the report and not the report itself, you cannot ignore how horrendous some of the abuse that was going on was. And I really hope that it causes other federations, other journalists, other people in countries all over the world to take a bit of a closer look at the systems that are in operation, because there's no way that this is limited to the NWSL. I mean, we saw it with the French Federation being accused of hiding up similar things a couple of weeks ago. This is happening all over the place. Hopefully now this has come out, people will see there is repercussions, that there are ways that you can get your story told, and there are people who will support you in that. It's a hard process, it's a long process, but the recourse is there.
Yeah, there's a phrase about this being an open secret because it was so pervasive.
Well, there was always rumours, say, like, certain, because of the way the draft system works in the US, you know, you could be told day to day that, okay, well, your rights have been sold to this club and you have to go there. And there had been reports of some of the coaches that are mentioned in the report, players not wanting to report to them and just doing whatever they can, taking contracts abroad, because you can do that. You can still have, your rights can still be owned in the US, but you can still go to Europe or Australia or wherever. Them trying to find overseas deals so they didn't have to work with certain coaches. You talk to a lot of the US reporters. A lot of this stuff was known, but it was just getting someone to come forward. And that's why I was saying earlier that what Mana Shim and Sinead Farrelly did was so important, and Kay McCullough as well. There was a couple of players. Because they broke that barrier. They were the first ones that said, okay, we're going to stand up, we're going to say something. And that gave other people the gap to go through. It gave other people the space to do it. And it just takes one a lot of the time for these things to open up in that way, and it becomes less of an open secret.
Yeah, so we can expect more, much more to come, because as you said, the scope of this investigation was quite narrow. It took a long time, but I guess in retrospect, the fact that it took a long time is probably good, because it means that it's going to be very robust from a legal perspective, and it's going to stand up to scrutiny from the lawyers of the people who are named and accused. But it does then allow the next bunch of investigations to dig similarly deep into other allegations that are out there at the moment.
Exactly. It sets the foundation and it sets the precedent. And I think when you look at the amount of documents that were coming through, I know Sally Yates and the US Soccer Federation and NWSL Players Association, all these different groups that were involved in it, all said at different times, like, the scale of reports that they were getting through and the scale of people coming to them was massive. So the fact that something has come out, and it's come out in a relatively short time frame, in the sense that, you know, people can still remember the league last year when players took that stance. People can still remember these stories. I think it is important that it was quite a tight time frame, but also there was one line in the report where I think Sally Yates said something about, you know, we wanted to get this out in a very quick time frame, so we didn't investigate certain things. I hope that doesn't mean that those go uninvestigated, that this is just like the starting block and like, okay, we've looked at these things, now we're going to set up another commission and we're going to look at youth soccer, we're going to look at other areas that maybe we just didn't have the time to do now. Because if we've learned anything from the very basic parts of this report, it's that this is going on in a lot of places, and this is by no means the end of it.
Yeah, the US Federation, in fairness to them, have immediately established an Office of Participant Safety, published soccer-related records from Safe Sports' centralised database of officials and coaches who've been investigated or sanctioned for misconduct, which is exactly what you need. It's like Coach A gets accused of something in one place and then 6 months later fetches up on the other side of America, and nobody knows anything about the fact that the reason they left under a cloud was because they'd been accused of something. And then also they're going to have background checks and create a participant safety task force led by athletes themselves, but they do need to investigate those other ones as well. So look, it's a developing story. We will continue to cover it. Kathleen, great stuff. Thanks a million for bringing us up to date on